This is Roger Green, host of the Surfing the NASH Tsunami podcast. This weekend, we are celebrating our third birthday, which was on April 15th, along with our breaking the 150,000 download barrier a week earlier. Today, we're releasing 3 special conversations, each containing one of the interviews we included with this week's episode. Over the weekend, we will release more typical conversational cuts from the main podcast recording session. Before we start, I want to thank the 3 sponsors of our third birthday celebration, Magical Pharmaceuticals, Novo Nordisk, and Inventiva Pharma, along with some of the patient advocacy organizations that have been supporters since we started the podcast, notably included the Global Liver Institute, NASH Knowledge, the Fatty Liver Foundation, and the Fatty Liver Alliance. I'm sure I've forgotten somebody. Please accept my apology. Finally, I want to thank Louise Campbell, our lead surfer, who joined me for all 3 of these interviews, and Stephen Harrison and Jorn Schottenberg, the 2 other lead surfers who didn't join these interviews, but have been with us on the podcast episode and throughout this entire fantastic 3-year journey. This conversation captures the interview that Louise Campbell and I conducted with Amy Articolo, Senior Medical Director and Liver Unit Lead at Novo Nordisk. The conversation looks at how the fatty liver community, Novo Nordisk, and Amy's career in NASH have all progressed over the past 3 years. Amy discusses Novo Nordisk's transition from being a company with promising NASH data to a company developing an important early entrant in the fatty liver drug market. She discusses the importance of what she describes as the true collaboration, her words, between all the key stakeholders in this community, leading to her aha moment, which was that, and I quote, "We really can do this." In response to a question from Louise, she defines the "this we can do" in terms of support for patients with the various elements of metabolic disease. Patients she describes as polychronics, a term we've never used before in this podcast but will be part of our future. She goes on to discuss the importance of multi-stage integrated clinical care pathways supported by electronic medical records that drive reflexive NASH test series that do not involve biopsy and lead these patients to be supported by the appropriate level of medical provider. The conversation moves on to discuss the future role of primary care in this process. They are, in fact, the likely treaters for polychronics looking forward. And the question of whether the drug market 3 years from now will have 2 entrants or more than that many. Each of the interviews in this series provides an opportunity to understand what drives a key player in the evolving community and what they see happening in the future from their vantage point. Listening to these 3 interviews and the conversations that capture the lead surfer dialogue will give you a pretty good flavor of where we've been and where we're going from the vantage points of several different individuals. I'm thrilled to have been part of it. Okay, so this morning we are fortunate to be joined by Amy Articolo from Novo Nordisk. Amy, this isn't your first time with us.
Amy Articolo.
No, it is not.
That was a famous and amazingly well-received podcast back at the beginning of 2022 talking about NASH-TAG and NAIL-NIT and all these exciting things in the future. And we've gone another 16 months forward from there. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much. How are you?
I'm doing fine, and Louise is with us this morning. Good afternoon, Louise.
Louise Campbell.
Yes, just gone into the afternoon. So
it's the start of the workday in the U.S., or roughly the start of the workday in the U.S., and roughly the start of the afternoon in the U.K., so we're all good. So, Amy, thanks for joining us, and thanks to Novo Nordisk for being one of the sponsors of our third birthday celebration, and to your being available as you come back from vacation to make time in your day, albeit first thing in the morning, to do this conversation. We're glad to have you with us. So, what we were talking about on podcast yesterday, and what we'll be talking about in our interview with you and a couple of others, is where we were 3 years ago when this podcast started and what's changed since then, and then looking forward 3 years, what we think will happen in the interim. 3 years ago, you weren't even working on NASH personally, were you, at that point in time?
No, you're correct, Roger, and thank you so much for this opportunity to be here. On behalf of Novo Nordisk, we're really super thrilled to be a part of the birthday celebration, so happy birthday to Surfing the NASH Tsunami. As I reflect on 3 years ago, you are correct. I had started out with a focus as the medical director for obesity and NASH because our phase 2 data hadn't been published yet. And so when I think about where we were in 2020 and beyond, we were looking at our data. We were thrilled to see a positive result on NASH resolution of our data and published that in New England Journal of Medicine. And then from there, we were really excited about where our next steps would be. If I take us a step back even more, be into the past, I'd like to say that our endeavors in NASH as a company started out with an independent sponsored study. So it's wonderful partnerships that we have with everyone in this space that we really value because it helps us really drive to meet the needs of the patients. 3 years ago, we were thinking about what the NASH ecosystem looked like and how can we be a partner and with hope and fingers crossed to be a leader as well in this space. I'm just really thrilled to see all of the changes that have occurred that are going to benefit patients in the space. 3 years ago, there was still so many struggles in terms of a therapeutic being available. Liver biopsy was still predominant. Where Novo Nordisk was going to have a role in the NASH space was still to be determined. And so I can say with a lot of happiness that it has really morphed into something truly positive. Relationships are key. Really focusing on patients' unmet needs is going to be key, and really finding what's going to matter in clinical practice. And as everyone knows, an OBGYN and a clinician by heart. So I always think about how that interaction really needs to be optimized so that it benefits patients. And to be able to do that, we really want to think about simplifying that process. And I think 3 years ago, we weren't sure what to do with that. And now 3 years here and 3 years in the future, I think that we see a path forward to make that happen.
So first of all, I should note that when you talk about where your career started, every time I think about you, I get this little thought bubble about going from having delivered 10,000 babies to helping probably billions of people by the time we're done do a better job in their advancing years. You truly embody the whole cradle to grave thing. And to take it one step further, 16 years ago when your babies were really little ones, I was talking to Novo Nordisk about how to make sense out of what liraglutide meant, given that GLP-1s were a different cast of characters than anything that had appeared in diabetes or metabolic disease up until that point in time. So it's been a long journey for the company and an interesting ride for you. So when you think about, if you had to pick one or two ahas from the last 3 years, what would they be, do you think?
That's a great question. And from personal experience with working in NASH, I think one of the greatest ahas was the true collaboration that I see with thought leaders, experts, the specialists in really trying to do the right thing for patients. And what I mean by that is that we have a pretty big gap to address in the sense that this is a relatively under and undiagnosed condition compared, let's say, to cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and other metabolic type conditions. It's really amazing. And so that was an aha moment that when we think about that gap, and it can seem sometimes to be a really steep climb up a mountain, if you will. For me, the aha moment was we can do this because everyone really is moving in the right direction. All of the experts and thought leaders and the data, our partners in regulatory authority seats, everybody wants to see this happen. So that was, I would say, one of the biggest aha moments, which is really great in this space because it means that we really can do this.
First of all, I can't believe it was 18 months ago since you came on the podcast. Just looking at the Novo space where you've moved to with the GLP-1s, with all of the data, and how that's gathering momentum across those fields has been fabulous. One of the things that you touched on there is the collaboration. The collaboration in NASH and NAFLD that Novo bring is this cross-dimensional and cross-speciality strength that you have. You alluded to before with obesity, diabetes, and that. And I think, how do you see that strength that you've got being able to be delivered in NAFLD and NASH as we move forward? Because it's a great skill set to have already in your armory.
Yeah, that's a great point. And we think about that too is, what benefit can we bring from our knowledge, especially in the GLP-1 space? And so we look at our emerging data, right? So what are our clinical trials exploring? We've got some really exciting clinical trials we're going to read out in the next year or two, especially that could touch the NASH patient, particularly looking at our phase 3 data. That trial's ongoing, and our large cardiovascular trial looking at SEMA 2.4. So really excited about that because of the benefit. And then, looking at just across the GLP-1 portfolio, what benefits can we glean? What learnings do we see that is going to benefit patients who struggle with not just NASH, but perhaps diabetes and obesity? Because as you know from the guidelines, the at-risk population typically does have those conditions. So what benefit can we bring, whether it's from our clinical trials or real-world evidence, that is going to be able to demonstrate that impact that's going to continue to move the space forward?
That's interesting. I know we're working together on the Rising Tide series with Novo Nordisk, that one of the pivotal issues I think you folks are focusing on, maybe more than some other people, are primary care and the whole issue of clinical care pathways and how do you take and push back up line to liver health, which is Louise's area of interest as well. So can you comment a little bit on what you envision might happen over the coming year, 3 years, in terms of outreach to a broader medical community to get care to patients earlier in the continuum?
Oh, Roger, now you're speaking to what I call my personal baby and ambition here. So absolutely, I think that the guidelines put a significant stake in the ground at really identifying the opportunities for the non-specialists and specialists to work together, especially with utilizing the non-invasive tests, which it resonates with me when we had a podcast about, let's not call them non-invasive tests, let's just call them NASH tests, because that makes sense, right? We refer to tests that don't require histologic tissue as tests, so why not do that here as well? Because that distinction might make all the difference when it comes to the access perspective. That might be another aha moment.
We had that moment together, you and me. Yeah, go ahead.
That's right. Aha moment number 2. But in terms of care pathways, absolutely, I see the future being a way to optimize through the electronic health record where everyone is in the care continuum, primary care who touches the patient, endocrinologists, OBGYN, specialists who are able to utilize what the evidence-based guidelines demonstrate to follow that algorithm, and then reflexive order sets with reflexive prompts to streamline the process to identify the at-risk patient, diagnose them, and then get them the resources that they so desperately need, which includes confirmatory tests all the way through management. And with treatment therapeutics looming on the horizon, I think that this is going to really have a tremendous uptick. So if I had in 3 years from now, hopefully we're going to have this conversation and say, as you recall, we talked about this and now it's streamlined mainstream care.
I just thought that was a very interesting point. Amy's right. From the sound of it, we have the ability to turn primary care, who tend to refer everything with liver straight to a liver physician, into liver experts, tests that allow them to do that and be comfortable about referral onwards. That just resonates with me, what Amy was saying there, and that skill set and speciality, because I know we've had the conversation in the UK with NICE and with physicians saying, if you only allow specialists to use FibroScan, you're telling primary care they cannot do liver care. That is by far the wrong signal to be sending, because they do liver care very, very well. Sometimes they just don't know how well they do it. So that whole process that Amy described and moving into that way is exactly what she said. We're going to take this, and in 3 years' time, we're going to be turning around and saying every primary care is going, we're experts in liver health and care and that prevention. And I think that's the strength of what Novo Nordisk are bringing, and the rising tide, and obviously serving NASH.
And I think the whole space. Amy, we had 2 dynamics that came out of our conversation with Jorn and Stephen and Louise and me yesterday. One of them is actually this one, which is the more I listen, the more I believe that all these diseases in the metabolic spectrum are going to fold back on each other. That I'm not sure that what we're going to have 3 years from now are primary care docs who are experts in liver health per se, but they will have a much broader understanding of how all the metabolic pieces go together and the role of liver as canary in the coal mine, and will react accordingly. So they won't be treating cirrhosis any more than they are right now, but they will be able to identify problems earlier and challenges earlier and understand the breadth of the challenge and how to treat it appropriately. On the other hand, Stephen said yesterday, and I'm quoting, this is one of these Stephen, I'm going to be controversial moments, where he said, I'm not sure that we're going to have more than just resmetirom and OCA in 3 years if we have OCA, given the timelines to getting drugs delivered. So I'm wondering the degree to which the pace of drug approval is going to affect the process we're talking about now. I think it will certainly affect what happens in F3, but I'm wondering from your perspective how central, when for exactly what SEMA, for example, were to get approved, how much effect that will have on this meta trend in primary care that we're talking about. Or do you think that's something that's going to develop its own momentum anyway because of diabetes and obesity and kidney and just everything else that's going on?
Yeah, Roger. So 2 comments on that. The first is that I agree that primary care, even if they're not interested in becoming the experts, right? That they just want to be more confident and feel that they've got tools in their toolbox to be able to address these chronic diseases. And wouldn't it be just amazing if the liver disease space helps be that connector of all things chronic disease that impacts, let's say, the various different organs that they take care of already, right? Cardiovascular disease, chronic kidney disease, and now chronic liver disease. So I do see that the guidelines were the first stake in the ground for that. Care pathways, simplifying where to find what resources and how through an automated process is going to help mainstream the care model and allow for, as Louise mentioned, mentioned, who does what when, who should be referred and when, is still going to be there, and appropriately so. But there's going to be that opportunity to really connect all the dots and, to your point, see the metabolic disease as it is in terms of these various different, we call the polychronics, right? The chronicity of disease that can be impacted by therapies that have been explored in different areas. And that's certainly the ambition of Novo Nordisk, to explore these different disease states that the molecule semaglutide can impact, because it can also help reduce polypharmacy, simplify the process for the patient, et cetera, et cetera. In terms of availability, I will have to push back on Stephen. I don't think that there's only going to be 2 in 3 years. I do think that semaglutide will have a significant place in the hearts and minds of being in the toolbox and availability. And the good news is that we have tremendous data that's already in existence. So there's a lot of comfort and confidence in how the trials were conducted, the utilization in real world, and its impact and benefit for patients. So I do think that it's going to have a significant role to help a variety of different patients, depending on where they are in their stage of disease. Thinking about the future, that's our commitment to pipeline, right? We recognize that monotherapy is likely not going to be the answer for all, and that makes sense. So our commitment to exploring combination therapies, what kind of combinations that could really provide mechanistic diversity from a mechanistic perspective, but then also demonstrate the safety and efficacy as well, is certainly our commitment. So I think 3+ years from now, there's going to be a significantly different field than it is today, and I'm really looking forward to it.
As are we all. So first of all, Amy, in wrapping up this brief interview, I want to note that that's the first time the phrase polychronic has ever made its way to this podcast. It will not be the last. It will not be the last. Louise and I will remind each other to give you appropriate credit when we use it, just so we know who to brand it to, number one. Number two, so thanks for making time this morning. I know you just got back from vacation and you've been scrambling like crazy, so we're really appreciative for you doing this. And congratulations on just a fantastic foray for you personally and the company into fatty liver space. And your enthusiasm and passion are really self-evident, really, every time you speak by the third word. And it's just a great thing to hear. And I think we're fortunate, all of us, to have you with us. So with that, let me say thanks for today.
Thank you.
And we look forward to having you back on the podcast many more times in the future.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Louise. And it's been an honor as always. And, it's just amazing to continue to work with everybody in this space. So really appreciate the offer.
And now back to Roger.
We hope you've enjoyed this recording. If you have any questions or comments about the content of this interview or the entire episode, please put them in the review section of the page from which you downloaded this conversation, or send an email to questions@surfingnash.com. This weekend, we will be releasing 5 more conversations that represent the body of the actual episode that Stephen, Jorn, Louise, and I conducted, and we released to you folks on Wednesday night. Next week, we'll be joined by the French endocrinologist Cyril Cossy, who will be talking about the interplay between endocrinology and hepatology, both in research and in clinical care pathways in France. It promises to be a fascinating conversation. So until then, stay safe, surf on. We'll see you on the podcast. Bye-bye now.